Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going deep on something I think we all struggle with a little bit.
Yeah.
Breaking free from bad habits
Oh, absolutely.
and really building the ones that make us happier and help us live better lives. I'm talking about things like endlessly scrolling on TikTok or, maybe spend a little too much time on Pornhub, those kinds of things. And to help us crack the code on this, we are diving deep into Atomic Habits by James Clear.
That's right. And, it's not just about productivity or, just getting things done.
Right.
It's really about how to align your actions with the life that you want to be living. And that's what I think Atomic Habits really tries to unpack and provide a practical framework for.
Absolutely. And, I think we've all been there where you finish a self-help book and you're like, yes, let's do this.
Right.
And then like 2 days later, you're back to the same old routines.
Yeah.
So today, we really want to make sure that we're not just give you a summary of the book.
Right.
We want to give you guys some actual strategies that you can use to implement these ideas in your own life.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that Clear really emphasizes is the power of tiny changes.
Okay.
He calls it the principle of marginal gains, focusing on getting just 1% better each day.
1%.
1%. And you might think, well, that's nothing. But let me ask you this. Imagine improving something by just 1%
Okay.
every single day for an entire year.
I mean, that's got to add up to something, right?
It's significant. And I think one of the best stories that really illustrates this is the one that Clear tells about British cycling.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Where they basically revolutionized their performance by focusing on these tiny, seemingly insignificant improvements.
Weren't they obsessing over hand washing techniques?
Absolutely. They wanted to prevent the common cold as much as possible.
Oh, wow.
So they had the best hand-washing techniques. They painted the inside of the team truck white so that they could spot any dust and make sure that the bikes were perfectly maintained.
Oh.
They even brought their own mattresses and pillows to hotels to ensure they were getting a good night's sleep.
Although that's interesting.
And each of these tweaks on its own might seem small,
Yeah.
but together they had this massive impact on their results.
So it's really not about these overnight success stories or anything like that.
It's not a movie montage.
It's not a movie montage.
Yeah.
It's really these consistent, tiny actions that build up over time.
Yeah, and that I think is one of the things that's really encouraging about the book.
I like
It
it.
makes positive change feel much more attainable.
Yeah.
Because you're not trying to climb this massive mountain all at once.
Right.
You're just taking these small steps each day.
Yeah.
And it leads us to one of, I think, the most important ideas in the book, which is the idea of focusing on systems rather than goals.
Okay, so I'm a big goal setter.
Okay.
Help me understand this. Why is it better to focus on systems than goals?
Sure. Well, think about this. Two people could have the same goal. Let's say running a marathon. One person might plan their training schedule meticulously,
Right.
gradually increase their mileage, prioritize recovery. The other person might just go for a run sporadically whenever they feel like it. Who do you think is more likely to actually cross that finish line?
Yeah, the one with a plan for sure.
Exactly. And that's really the difference between having a goal and having a system. The system is the set of habits and processes that actually support you in achieving that goal.
Okay.
It's what keeps you showing up even when your motivation is low.
So instead of saying, I'm going to quit TikTok
Yeah.
cold turkey,
Yeah.
which, let's be honest, can feel pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's more like, I'm going to create systems that help me naturally reduce my usage.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
So that might involve setting very clear boundaries for yourself, maybe designate specific times for social media, or remove the app from your phone during work hours.
Right.
It's all about designing your environment to make the things that you want to do easier and the things you don't want to do harder.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But how do these habits, good or bad, how do they actually get wired into our brains in the first place?
Yeah, so Clear breaks down the science of habit formation into what he calls the habit loop.
Okay.
And you can kind of think of it as a 4-step neurological feedback loop.
Okay.
So it starts with a cue, which is anything that triggers your brain to initiate a behavior.
Okay, so let's take the TikTok example. The cue could be something like, I'm feeling bored,
Yeah.
I'm feeling stressed, or maybe I just see my phone light up with a notification.
Exactly. And then that cue triggers a craving. That's the motivational force behind the habit.
What?
So in that case, you might be craving a distraction or that little dopamine hit that comes from seeing something novel.
Got it.
And that craving leads to the response, which is the actual habit itself. So picking up your phone and scrolling.
Okay.
And finally, you get the reward. And that's the satisfying feeling that reinforces the entire loop.
right? So it's that feeling of instant gratification that keeps us coming back even when we know it's not good for us in the long run.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to become aware of our own habit loops, both the good ones and the bad ones. Once you understand those cues, those cravings, the responses, and the rewards that are driving our behavior, then we can start to kind of consciously interrupt those patterns and create new ones that are more helpful for us.
Okay, this is starting to make sense now,
Yeah.
but I think we've thrown a lot of information at you guys. So let's take a minute to let that all sink in. And when we come back, we're going to unpack how to actually apply these concepts from Atomic Habits to break those bad habits and start building the habits that'll help you thrive.
I can't wait. All right, so now that we understand kind of the science behind habits,
Yeah.
how do we actually use this knowledge to break free from those negative patterns and,
Right.
actually make a change?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Yep.
It's one thing to understand the habit loop,
Right.
but it's another thing to actually break those bad habits that are keeping us from,
Yeah.
feeling really fulfilled.
Absolutely. And I think Clear gives us a really useful framework for this.
Okay.
It's based on what he calls the 4 laws of behavior change,
Okay.
but we're going to invert them
Okay.
to break a bad habit.
Okay. Yeah.
So remember we talked about for good habits, you want to make them obvious,
Yeah.
attractive, easy, and satisfying.
Right.
For bad habits, you want to make them invisible, unattractive,
Okay.
difficult, and unsatisfying.
Okay. So to make a bad habit invisible, we're essentially removing the cue, right?
Exactly.
Like, for example, I used to have this really bad habit of eating ice cream late at night.
Oh, yeah.
And I kind of got it under control when I just moved the ice cream to the back of the freezer where I couldn't see it.
It's amazing how much our environment really impacts our behavior.
Yeah, totally.
So if you're trying to reduce your TikTok use, for example, one thing you could do is delete the app from your phone or log out of your account so you have to go through those extra steps to get in.
Right. It's all about increasing that friction a little bit,
Exactly.
making it just a little bit harder to indulge in the bad habit.
Yeah.
So what about making it unattractive?
Yeah.
That one seems a little trickier.
It is a little bit more about your mindset.
Right.
It's about kind of reframing how you think about the habit. Instead of focusing on that immediate gratification,
Yeah.
you highlight the negative consequences. So, for example, if you're trying to cut back on Pornhub,
Yeah.
you might remind yourself that it's actually taking time away from other things that you really enjoy.
Mm.
Or it might be making you feel a little bit disconnected from your partner,
Yeah.
from real life intimacy.
Right. So it's really shifting that perspective and being honest with yourself about what are the downsides?
Yeah.
Even if they're not immediately obvious.
Totally.
And then there's make it difficult.
Yeah.
Isn't that kind of what we're already doing by making it invisible and unattractive?
There is some overlap there, but this is taking it a step further. So making it difficult is all about adding these extra barriers or inconveniences
Right.
to make the habit less accessible. Clear talks about this idea of activation energy.
Okay.
The amount of effort required to perform a habit, the higher the activation energy,
Yeah.
the less likely you are to do it.
Okay. So if I want to stop scrolling through social media in bed at night,
Yeah,
I could put my phone in another room.
exactly.
So I actually have to get out of bed to do it.
Absolutely. That increases the activation energy. Or you could do things like putting those tempting snacks that you might reach for late at night
Yeah.
up on a high shelf
Oh, yeah.
or in a really inconvenient cupboard so you have to work for it.
Right. It's all about setting yourself up for success.
Absolutely.
Okay. So then we have the final inversion, which is make it unsatisfying.
Right.
I mean, that one seems pretty intuitive to me.
It is intuitive, but I think this is one of the harder ones to actually put into practice.
Yeah.
Because it often requires kind of rewiring those reward associations in our brain.
Yeah.
Because remember, our brains are really wired to seek pleasure and to avoid pain.
Right.
So to make a bad habit unsatisfying, you really have to start associating it with some negative feelings
Right.
or consequences.
So it's one thing Clear talks about is the idea of a habit contract.
Yeah.
You actually write down okay, I'm not going to do this. If I
Yeah.
do it, then this is going to happen.
And you can even have an accountability partner
Oh, yeah. That's a good idea.
to kind of up the stakes.
Yeah, if I don't do this, then I have to pay you money or something like that.
Exactly. There's this great story in the book about an entrepreneur who wanted to lose weight,
Okay.
and he made a habit contract with his trainer that said he would track all of his meals,
Mm.
weigh himself every day, and if he failed to do that,
Yeah.
he had to pay his trainer, I think it was $100.
Ooh. That's a good motivator.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about all these like great strategies and everything, but I think we should acknowledge that like
Yeah.
we're human. We're gonna mess up.
Totally.
We're gonna have slip-ups.
It's inevitable.
We're gonna have that extra scoop of ice cream.
Absolutely.
We're gonna scroll TikTok a little too long.
Yeah.
How do we recover from those setbacks without like completely derailing our progress?
Yeah, and that's something that Clear actually addresses in the book.
Okay.
He says, don't let a slip-up turn into a relapse. So one missed workout doesn't mean you failed your entire fitness journey.
Right.
One late-night TikTok scroll doesn't mean you're back to square one.
Yeah.
The key is to get back on track as quickly as possible.
Yeah. It's so easy to fall into that all or nothing thinking.
Absolutely. It's not about perfection. It's
Mhm.
about consistency
Mhm.
and being able to recognize, okay, I kind of veered off course here a little bit, but
Yeah.
I'm going to get back on track.
But without beating yourself up about it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, okay, it happened. Let's move on.
It's part of the process.
Yeah.
And I think the more that you can kind of practice that, the more you're going to get better at dealing with those inevitable challenges.
Right. It's like building a muscle.
It is.
So the more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've talked about the 4 laws for building good habits.
Yep.
The inversions of those laws for breaking bad habits.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the importance of systems,
Yeah.
consistency,
Yeah.
self-compassion.
Totally.
But how do we kind of personalize this?
Mm.
Like, how do we figure out which habits are right for us?
Yeah, that's such a great question.
Because, not everybody thrives on the same routine.
Not at all. And this is where I think this idea that Claire calls the Goldilocks zone is really useful.
Okay, Goldilocks zone. I like it. Lay it on me. What
Yeah.
is that?
So you know the story of Goldilocks and the 3 bears?
Yeah.
So basically the idea is that we all kind of experience this peak motivation when we're working on tasks that are challenging enough to keep us engaged, but not so difficult that we just get overwhelmed and want to quit.
Okay.
It's about finding that sweet spot
Got it.
where the challenge is just right.
So it's like finding that balance between boredom and frustration.
Yeah, exactly. But that sweet spot is going to be different for everybody
Right.
because what feels challenging for one person might feel completely impossible for someone else.
Right.
So it's all about experimenting
Yeah.
and paying attention to your own experience.
So like, how do you know if a habit is too easy or too difficult?
Yeah, so Claire suggests paying attention to your level of engagement and
Mhm.
satisfaction. So if you find yourself feeling bored or restless when you're doing something,
Yeah.
it might be a sign that it's time to level up,
Okay.
make it a little more challenging.
Got it.
If you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed,
Yeah.
then maybe you need to scale back a little bit.
So it's really like Goldilocks trying all those different chairs until she finds the one that's like, this one's just right.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
that feeling of, this is challenging,
Yeah.
but I can do this.
Okay, I love this. So I think, we all need to kind of take a moment to reflect on our own habits
Mhm.
and see if they're really in that Goldilocks zone.
I love that.
But, before we get too comfortable in our metaphorical chairs,
Yeah.
we have this one big question that we haven't really answered yet,
What's that?
which is how do we keep this momentum going? Like, how do we make sure that
Yeah.
we're not just, bouncing from one habit to the other
Yeah.
without making any real lasting change?
Such a good question. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack when we come back for the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Atomic Habits.
Mhm.
And we've covered a lot of ground. We talked about the science of habit formation,
Yeah.
the 4 laws of behavior change and their inversions,
Right.
the importance of systems, finding that Goldilocks zone. But, how do we actually make these changes stick for the long haul?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, how do we stay motivated and committed when things get tough?
One of the things that I really appreciate about Atomic Habits
Yeah.
is that Clear goes beyond just the practical strategies.
Okay.
And he really delves into kind of the psychology of behavior change.
Okay.
He argues that true transformation actually starts with identity change.
Okay, so we're not just changing our actions.
No.
We're actually changing who we believe we are.
Exactly.
That's pretty deep.
It is, but I think it's also a really empowering idea
Okay.
because think about it this way. Your current habits are a reflection of your current identity.
Okay.
So if you see yourself as someone who's lazy
Mm,
or undisciplined,
right.
you're more likely to engage in behaviors that reinforce that belief.
Right. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly.
So how do we break out of that cycle then? Like, how do we actually change how we see ourselves?
Well, Clear talks about this idea of casting votes for the person you want to become.
Okay.
So every time you perform a desired action, You're essentially casting a vote for that new identity.
So instead of saying, like, I want to exercise more,
Yeah,
I could say, I'm becoming an athlete.
exactly. It's a subtle shift,
Yeah,
but I think it can be really powerful.
right. So it's about, like, shifting your self-talk and your actions
Hmm.
to actually align with that new belief.
Exactly.
So every time I, like, choose to eat a healthy meal, I'm casting a vote for being someone who prioritizes their health.
Exactly.
Every time I, like, resist that urge to scroll, I'm casting a vote for being someone who's more present and focused.
Absolutely.
I like that. It's
Yeah.
like we're literally building ourselves one choice at a time.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to acknowledge that staying motivated can be really tough.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, like, how do we keep that momentum going when the initial excitement wears off?
Yeah, so one thing that Claire suggests is tracking your progress and celebrating your wins no matter how small.
Okay.
Because even like checking off a small task on your to-do list
Yeah.
can release a little bit of dopamine,
Yeah.
which makes you feel good and reinforces that positive feeling of, I'm making progress.
It's like we're hacking our own reward system
Totally.
to make those good habits actually feel good. Are there any other strategies that we can use to stay motivated?
Yeah. I think one of the most powerful things you can do is surround yourself with people who support you.
Yeah.
Find your tribe.
Yeah.
Find people who share your values and your goals, people who are going to cheer you on and hold you accountable.
It's so much easier to stick with something when you've got people who are doing it with you.
For sure. It's like having a built-in cheerleading squad.
Totally.
And then when you do encounter setbacks, because you know they're going to happen,
Of course.
be kind to yourself.
Right.
Don't let those slip-ups derail your entire effort.
Mm-hmm.
View them as learning opportunities
Yeah.
and keep moving forward.
This has been such a great deep dive.
I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's really helped me kind of like shift my thinking about habits. And it's giving me some really concrete strategies that I can use to actually make some changes
Yeah,
and, build that life that I really want to be living.
absolutely.
And I think for our listeners,
Yeah.
the key takeaway here is that even small changes consistently applied can lead to really remarkable results.
For sure.
So think about, like, what's one tiny habit you can commit to today that will move you closer to that life that you want?
It's been such a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Likewise. And to our listeners, thank you guys so much for joining us on this deep dive into Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
We hope you've gained some valuable insights and inspiration to unlock your own potential, one small habit at a time.